headstand, touching the toes, putting your feet behind your neck. This Vrishchikasana, the scorpion pose, those are all very difficult things, and still they don't clean the heart. So cleansing of the heart occurs by hearing Krishna Katha. This is the most wonderful process. Nanu Krishna Kathapi Tvaya Bahusayeva Shruta Tatraha Kaiti. So if someone says that you are asking me to speak about Krishna Katha or stories about Krishna, says you have also heard a lot about that. Since he has heard from Vyasa, then it is not that Vyasa was only teaching him some niti, because Mahabharata is a book of niti, means polity, how you have to live in this world. There is a lot, because it is a lot of it was spoken to Yudhishthira Maharaj, who was a king, and king have to deal with so many people. So that is politics, diplomacy. There is a lot of talk of diplomacy. So it is not that Mahabharata is only talking about diplomacy. There are also so many stories of Krishna in Mahabharata. So Maitreya says, you are asking me to speak about Krishna. You have already heard so much about Krishna. So then he said, oh, who is satisfied by hearing about Krishna? There is more and more desire. Krishna Kathapi Tvaya. So he says, Kastripyat Tirthapado Avidhanat. He says, who is that person who becomes bored by hearing about Krishna? And there is so many activities which God performs. Everything is not written in the books, because it is not possible to write everything. So he says, Abhidhanat namta eva kimut kathabhya. So he says, even his names of Krishna are so wonderful. Every name of Krishna has meaning. It describes his character, his quality, or his activity. And just these names are very wonderful, very sweet. You can sing them as songs with musical instruments, and they are very pleasing. And then what to speak of the stories when you hear of them. Yadva abhidhanat kathan matrad leblope panchami. So he says nobody is satisfied with that, and therefore even the self-realized souls, they are speaking these stories and singing about Krishna. Then he actually explains now that the real purpose of Mahabharata is not talking about diplomacy, etc., but it was also meant to make people interested in hearing about Krishna. So it's a very nice verse. It says, Munir vibakshur bhagavad gunanam sakhapite bharatamah krishnaha yasmin nirnam gramya sukhanuvadair mati grihitanu harihe kathayam. Vidura is saying that, O Maitreya, even your friend Sri Vyasa, who wrote Mahabharata, his interest was to glorify the Lord. Vivakshu Bhagavad Gunanam. His interest was not in telling history. People try to do research, modern scholars in Mahabharata, Ramayana, in the Puranas, and thinking, well, this is a historical fact. And then they say, oh, there are so many contradictions in this. Because the author is not writing this as a history book. like you read history now chronologically. History before Christ and history after Christ and history, modern history and Middle Age history and all this. So Mahabharata, although it is called Itihasa and which is translated as history, it is not a book of history. And we know it from here. It says Bhagavad Gunanam Vivakshu. He has the intention to describe the qualities of the Lord. And therefore he wrote Mahabharata. Sakhapite Bharata Mahakrishna. But he wrote many materialistic stories, Gramya Sukhanuvade. And the idea was that common people, they like to hear materialistic stories. If you give a discourse on Bhagavad Gita, then few people will come. But you tell a story about somebody's love affair, then there will be crowd to hear, like the movies and the plays. So what he did, that if you want to give medicine to a child, the child does not want to take medicine, because medicine is usually not very tasty. But what child likes is the sweet. So child's interest is in eating sweet, and your interest is in giving him medicine to cure his disease. He is sick. So then what do? You mix the two. You put the medicine outside the sweet. So therefore you have a pill coated with sugar. So it tastes sweet, but inside is bitter. So Vyasdev also used this technique. He wrote stories which look like the stories people like to hear. Somebody ran away with somebody's wife, right? Or they are trying to strip somebody's wife in the assembly, or somebody is stealing. So all these types of stories are described there because this interests people. Some family fight is going on, they captured the property, and there is a big war. People like to hear this. If you see all these cartoons with children play, it's all the time killing somebody, right? Children, all these children cartoons, mostly what do they have? Just smashing somebody. Some little animal is running, another one comes, they are running, chasing, he comes and he smashes it, then he comes out, then he smashes again. And the child see it and they laugh. So materialistic people, they like this type of violence. So then Mahabharata, big war. People say, why there is a war? Because this is what people like to hear this. They take pleasure in it. But in between there is Krishna. So Vyasadev's interest is to tell about Krishna. So in between there is, in Mahabharata there is Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is part of Mahabharata. There is also Moksha Dharma, Shanti Parva. So there is so much knowledge and philosophy in between. But all the time there are stories. There are stories about jackals, there are stories about fish, birds, demons, human beings, demigods, all types of stories. Snakes with 100 head, 1000 head, 10,000 head, snakes which can fly, snakes which talk, and then snakes which have girls which are beautiful and they marry human beings. So it is more than any Harry Potter. Whatever Harry Potter can imagine, more than that is already imagined in Mahabharata. So the interest was that it says Mati Grihitanu Hare Kathayam. Because Vyasa, he wanted that people's mind becomes attracted to Hari Katha. So you have Harry Potter and this is Hari Katha. So he's talking about Hari and this is talking about Hari. Hari is the name of Krishna. So Harry Potter is already there. Only thing is they have just pronounce it little differently. This is Hariputra. And that is Harry Potter. So the idea is that the Vedic literature, they are not interested in telling us simply stories, but they want to educate us how to live a happy, balanced, devotional life and thus make this human life successful. This is their goal. And for that, various types of stories are being told, especially Mahabharata. Mahabharata is very interesting. You start reading it, you can never put it off. So Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Mahabharatasyapi vastutas tatraiva tatparyam. He says, really speaking, Mahabharata is also interested only in speaking about Krishna. Munihi Krishno Vedavyasa. So this says Krishna who wrote this book, he is the Vedavyas. Vedavyas is also called Krishna. It's Krishna Dvaipayam. Gunanam iti dvitiyaya shashti yadva utkarsham iti akshep labdhi. So Mahabharata talks about the greatness of Krishna. Right from the beginning to end, everywhere you find Krishna. Krishna is pervading the whole book. So, very amazing book. Yasmin Bharate Gramya Sukhanuvadai Arthakam Kathanu Kathanai. So there are stories after stories speaking about material pleasures. And material pleasures are of two types. One is money. Money is sweeter than honey. And second is relation with the opposite sex. And these are the two things in this material world. You see any TV program, you'll only see these two things. You read novels, plays, stories, watch movies, only two things. So Mahabharata is full of these stories. Full. So much description about the wealth, beautiful houses, kingdoms, palaces, gems, and there's so much talk about family life, beautiful women, marriages, all this type. So Nirnam Vishya Lubdhanam api Matir Grihita. So people who are interested in materialistic pleasures, their mind is immediately attracted by these stories. They love this. Vyasena Swahasta Vashikrita. So Vyasdev, he wrote all this. Kimartham Harehe Kathayam Bhagavad Gita Narayaniya Upakyanandishu Praveshitu. So he wrote these stories so that people's mind can enter into hearing Bhagavad Gita and Narayaniya Upakyan, which is another part of Mahabharata. So just like you want to teach alphabets to a child, now child is not interested in learning alphabets. Child likes to eat. You give him candy, he is happy. And you tell him sit down and read, it's very hard for him. So therefore you say A for apple. So you make a big apple and you write A next to it. So your interest is in teaching him A, and child is looking at apple. So when he looks at apple, he also looks at A. And then every time he looks at apple, he looks at A. Then this A becomes imprinted in his mind. So you are attracting the mind of the child through the apple to A. And then you also make him recite A for apple, A for apple, A for apple. Then ultimately he forgets the apple and A remains. So similarly, in Mahabharata, the mind of human beings who are interested in material pleasures is attracted by telling them stories of material pleasures. But when they hear the story of material pleasure, they also hear spiritual stories. So this is the way to attract the mind. This is a technique to bring people to spiritual life. And this is the intelligence of the author. Anyatha paramartha katham ashrinuvantas tetat samipam eva nayasam. Otherwise, these people who are whose only interest is hearing material talks, they will never come to hear spiritual stories. They are not interested. You tell them there is a talk of Vedanta, nobody will come. Taduktam itihasa samuchaya. So now he is quoting verses from one book called Itihasa Samuchaya, and this is talking about what Vyasdev has done in Mahabharata. Kamina praveshayatum kamino varnayan kaman lobham lubdhasya varnayan nara kim phalam apnoti kupendhamiva patayan. So he says that while describing the activities of lusty people and how they try to satisfy their lust, and about the greed of the greedy people, he showed what is the outcome of this, how they fall into a blind well by doing this. Because Mahabharata stories also tell that if people are engaged in materialist activities, how they have to suffer ultimately. Lokachittavatarartham varnetva tena tau itihasai pavitrarthai punastatraiva ninditau. So he says that for attracting the mind of common people, these stories about greed and lust have been described in Mahabharata, and then they have been also criticized, that one should not keep lust in the heart or have greed in the mind. These things are not good. Anyatha ghora sansara bandhu hetu janasya tau varnayet sa katham vidvan mahakaruniko muniriti. So he says, he has described that how these two things, they become the cause of material bondage, material suffering. So his purpose is not to make us become more lusty and greedy, but how to become free from this. Because the sage who wrote, he is Mahakarunika, he is very compassionate. And like a good doctor, he is not going to give us medicine to make us more sick. So when you go to an Ayurvedic doctor and he sees your disease, then he will ask you to avoid certain food articles, because he knows that by eating these food articles your disease will become enhanced and you will not be cured. So in the same way, he is not interested in giving us this lust and greed which we already have, but how to get rid of it. But to make us free from that, he is describing them and then telling what is the effect of this. As Ayurvedic doctor may tell you that if you are having problem and you are sick, then this particular food article is not good, because it will increase your pitta or it will decrease your vata, and then you will be in more trouble. So he explains. So when he is describing about the prohibited foods, his interest is not that you eat them, but to avoid them. So in the same way, Vyasa has described the stories of lust, greed, anger, aversion, hatred, so that we understand what happens if we inculcate these qualities or if we harbor them. So after knowing the outcome, then we give them up. This is the plot behind these stories. So that is about Mahabharata. And then we will speak a few more verses, and then Maitreya will start answering. So we'll read tomorrow.
These 88,000 sages, they were all sitting together for 30 years?
Yes. And they did not die. In 12 years nobody died, because they had invited Yamaraj to hear the stories.
Was sitting there. After that he has a lot of work on
So
his
at
desk.
least he spared them.
I would like to understand more about what you said on faith. How is it generated? How is faith generated?
By association.
By association? Hearing?
Yes. Association mainly means hearing.
Okay. So that can be quite subjective.
Yes.
So then it can also be generated by our desires, good or bad.
Well, faith is of two types, material faith and spiritual faith.
Okay.
Spiritual faith is more like a blessing of a holy person, because you may hear and still not get faith, so it comes as a blessing.
So those who were saying that, like we spoke earlier today on point of faith, those are like saying, oh, I put my faith in this guru, but after some years, you know, I don't have faith in him anymore. Or, you know, he's gone different, he's become different. So what is that kind of faith?
But faith is a different type of faith. The spiritual faith is in, or to begin with, actually it is in scripture, not in a person. So even if the person has problem, your faith does not change, because your faith is in the meaning of the scripture. So that remains. And if you find that you put a faith in a person which is actually based on scripture and there is a problem, then you don't lose your faith. You continue, you find another guide. But if you did not have faith in the scripture and it was only in the person, then you may even give up the process. So that means your faith was not spiritual. Because spiritual faith will not be destroyed. But material faith can change. So therefore, this faith is called Shastriya Shraddha, or trust in the meaning of the scripture. And once you have that, then that does not change, because the Shastra is not changing, scripture does not change. person can change. See the whole thing. Guru problem.
So, if I understand it, it means it's better to have faith in the scripture than in the Guru. Of course, we need Guru to interpret the scripture.
Well, when you have faith in scripture, then you will also have faith in Guru. Because scripture itself is saying to have a Guru. But when you don't have faith in scripture and you only have faith in Guru, then you may lose that, and then you may not have faith neither in scripture nor in Guru. So therefore Krishna says, Tasmas Shastram Pramanante, that your authority for getting knowledge is Shastra. And you have faith in Guru because of faith in Shastra, not independently. When you have faith independently, then only deviations come. And people start saying, well, my Guru said like this, therefore I am doing, even if it is contradicting the Shastra. So that's why you see so much varieties, different, what you call dispensations or
Dispositions.
different schools. Because some illustrious people come, and they say things, and they have followers. But if it is based on Shastra, then it remains same. Evam parampara prapta nemam rajarshyo vidu sakalini mehta yogo nashtaha parantapa. So this knowledge is obtained through parampara and originally based in Shastra.
One more aspect to this. The mind is easily impressed when it's hearing. Right? So somebody can be hearing and be impressed, and then faith is generated. But
Yes.
they don't have enough intelligence yet to know the Shastric understanding, or to know the Shastras. Yet this faith isn't generated through the hearing.
That's why I said that spiritual faith is a blessing.
Right.
That means by the blessing of Krishna, you come in contact with a bona fide person here and you have faith. So the process appears same for both spiritual faith as well as material faith. But one is because of Krishna's blessing.
So then someone who is not knowing Shastra, not technically intelligent enough to know that, but is very sincere at heart and wanting to
Then Krishna
take
will
Krishna,
guide him.
then that's the blessing, is faith in the right
Yeah.
place.
Okay.